I don't know if you knew this, but there was a day when I was a football stud. I mean, everyone in the country was talking about me. You'll never know, so it's all good. Just kidding, no. But my senior year of high school, I played football, basketball, thank you guys. Loved playing, actually loved playing basketball. Basketball was my sport. Football, I just did because I like to hit people, and there was permission to do that. I'm less violent now, but back then, it's a different story. But anyway, senior year of football, first game of the season. I'm running down the field, right? Just like that. Someone out of nowhere came and hit me so hard. I got what we describe as the word decleated, where you fall like sideways, your feet go up in the air, and you just, boom, land on the ground. Now, I was all right. I finished the game and all that good stuff. But up in the stands that night was my varsity basketball coach, who decided for the rest of the week it would be appropriate to remind me why I should be playing basketball only, not football, because of that hit. And so all week long, he was giving me a hard time. This is why you should quit. You should be here training with me, blah, 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 blah. So second game of the season comes. I'm running down on the kickoff. Do y'all know what a kickoff is? All right, ask the neighbor next to you. Running on the kickoff, right? And I'll tell you not, lo and behold, it's about to happen again. But this time, I said, not today, sucker. I see you coming. I'm ready for you. So as he starts to approach me, I plant my foot in the ground. That was actually really dangerous. Plant my foot in the ground, and I get ready to just, well, the problem is, my foot stayed, but my knee went. And I tore my ACL, my MCL, both meniscuses in one blow. I don't remember much from that day. I just remember looking out the stars at this big old stadium and not knowing what in the world just happened. I would end up being in a wheelchair for a couple weeks, crutches for many weeks after that. Surgeries, all the stuff. But the biggest thing was how I responded. See, in that season of my life, I didn't really have the strongest foundation. And if I could be honest, I kind of had all my hopes and dreams in sports. Or you can understand there's probably other things that you might fill that category with. And so when I blew out my knee, I remember thinking, dude, this is it. This is over. And so I medicated myself with a life of partying, and we'll just encompass that with all the things you can imagine. So much so that I got to the end of my senior year, and I was having to take classes before school to make up for what I'd missed because I had just chosen everything but the things that mattered. Now, my point of the story is how I responded proved the foundation that I didn't have. See that? And I chased all the things and medicated myself and tried to get through on my own. And it was disastrous. It was disastrous. Life is full of trials, right? We understand that. If you've been around long enough, you get that. And what we're going to do today is we're going to start a 2-message journey. Now, we'll have a break next week as Chad comes, and he's going to share with us. But the week after, we're going to bring it back. And we're going to have a 2-week kind of journey here. And the crux of it is really going to be how we respond when the weathers of life hit us. And the second message, I'm just going to give you a heads up. It might be the most important message that I'll ever give here. And I'm not saying it's going to be the best message I ever give, clarify. But the content is so vital to us as Christ followers that I don't want you to miss it. So just mark your calendar for that, 2 weeks, don't miss it. But today we're going to look at how we respond when the trials of life hit us. Now, we don't have to be surprised. We know it from our own life. James tells us, James 1, chapter 2, dear brothers and sisters, when troubles, right? It doesn't say if troubles, maybe troubles. It says when troubles of any kind come your way, consider it an opportunity for great joy. Also notice that troubles is plural, so it doesn't mean only one trouble might come your way. You could have multiple, right? Your alarm didn't go off, you woke up late, the kids are fighting already because it's summer, you try to go to work, you go to Starbucks to get a coffee, the coffee's cold, then you hit traffic on your way to work, so now you're late, then you get struck by lightning. All of these things, right? It's like, here's the joy of life, it's trouble. So we know that this stuff's coming. But the key is, how do we respond? And so Jesus, dealing with this issue on the extremity, talks about it through a parable in what we call the Sermon on the Mount. Now, the Sermon on the Mount covers a couple of chapters. In Matthew, there's a couple of locations you can find it. But in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus basically gives this very long, many would argue, best sermon ever given, sermon that covers a multitude of topics. Basically, a multitude of things that if Christ followers will do these things, they can live a better life. Not a perfect life, not a blessed life. They would just live a better life. But the point of the sermon is he's trying to pepper his listeners and ultimately us with so many things, right? So many different things we're supposed to do that we begin to realize that it's impossible to do this. It's impossible to do all of the things that God's asked me to do. So what do I do? And this was exactly what he was trying to accomplish. He wanted his listeners then, and he wants us to know that we can't do it on our own. We need a Savior. And then the second piece, as we said, is he shows us how to live a better life. And so here's this beautiful thing, the Sermon on the Mount. But at the end of the sermon, he gives this wonderful parable of the builder, which talks about a foundation. And he's doing it because he wants to drive home this practical charge as he ends this great sermon, which is hearing is not enough. Hearing is not enough. So here's what we're going to do. I want to read to you the parable in full. I want to go through it verse by verse to make sure we understand everything he was trying to say. Then we'll read it again one more time at the end. And I think it's going to be super helpful. Y'all with me? Okay, here we go. Everyone then who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain fell and the floods came and the winds blew and beat on that house, but it did not fall because it had been founded on the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rain fell and the floods came and the winds blew and beat against that house and it fell, and great was the fall of it. Okay, so let's look at each verse one at a time, and I want to point out a couple things. So let's look at 24 first. He says, everyone then who hears these words, okay? Jesus gave this great sermon. He listed all of these things for us to follow. But he says, hearing's not enough. Now, I want to show you a couple things because it helps us to better understand what he's articulating here. The things that he had been describing in the Sermon on the Mount look like this. There's only a few. I'll give them to you. Let's put these up on the screen. Here's a couple of the things he was calling us as Christ followers to forgive others, to be reconciled to others, to be a peacemaker, give to the needy, love your enemies. That's a hard one. Do not commit adultery. That's important. Do not murder. Self-explanatory, right? So he lists, y'all there? Okay. He lists these things, and this is just a handful of them. And he says, here's the things I want you to do. This is what it looks like to follow me. If you want to be a Christ follower, I want these things to represent your life, right? And as we go through the list, we begin to realize quickly, well, this is a lot. And there's a lot to do here, and I don't know if I can do it. And his people were beginning to feel the same thing. But here's what was happening. He didn't want them to just sit in a room, get charged up because of a sermon, and then walk out the doors and do nothing with it. Let's go back to verse 24. Look at what he says. He says, then who hear these words of mine and does them will be like what? A wise man who built his house on the rock. Wisdom is to take Jesus' words and put them into action. Wisdom is not to take Jesus' words and store them away in your mind and live your life the way that you want. He says, if you want to be wise, it starts by taking what I'm saying and put it into action. And then by doing that, you build a house on a rock. You build a firm foundation. So then the question becomes, okay, so we see this, but why? What's happening here? What are you trying to articulate, Jesus? What do you want us to see? Because it sounds like what you're saying to me is if I do these things that you've asked me to do, then I'll be right with you. And then some, if you've been around church long enough, you go, well, doesn't that sound kind of like this works-based religion thing that we're told is not supposed to happen? So what's that about? Or maybe some of us think, is this that checkbox that we just keep going through the checklist so we can be a quote-unquote good Christian? Is that it? Well, I'm going to show you this really quickly. First, look at this up on the screen. Obedience to God, to grace. This is what we call a works-based religion. The idea is, hey, if I do these things, insert whatever it is, forgiveness, peacemaker, give to the needy, all the things. If I do these things, I'll get access to God, and by getting right with God, I'll experience the grace of God. This is a works-based religion. And at a glance, some might go, I get it. I mean, that's what the Bible is, a bunch of rules you're supposed to follow, right? So this makes sense. Here's the problem. The problem is what we've been saying. It'll never be enough. There's always something to do. No matter how many things you implement from the Sermon on the Mount or from the Bible or all the good things or how many doors you open for old ladies, no matter what you do, there will never be enough. There's always something else. This is why this formula doesn't work, and this is why it's so important to understand this is not what Jesus is asking. Instead, it looks like this. It's the grace of God extended to us, that we receive him as Lord and Savior, which gives access to God. And because of the access to God or the relationship with God, the overflow is obedience. That as I walk with God, I realize because of what he's done for me, he saved me from my sin. My goodness, I want to honor him. I want to live a life that brings him glory. We see the same thing in marriage, right? Some people get married like, I did my part. I worked out till I got married. I'm done. Take me as it is because you vowed you would, sucker, right? And it's like, that was a mean joke. Right? But you get it. Like, it's like, no. The wedding day is the beginning, not the end. Right? And from that day, you go, no, I've committed to you. We're not talking about appearance, by the way, but I want to love you well. I want to serve you well. I'm going to stick with you, good and bad, all those things. So this is the difference. But if we live in the opposite world, then we're constantly working, trying to get to God, and we miss it. So that's not what he's asking. And yet, in this parable, this is why it's so important. Because some people go, well, saved. I'm good. Live my life, do what I want, see God in the end. Hope it's not too bad. And he says, no. Listen, if this happened, that's why we do communion, right? To remind ourselves, like if this happened, if you really have a relationship with God, if God has saved you and you understand what that means, this will never be a problem. It's an overflow. It just happens. It just happens. And we're not talking about perfect people, because I'm looking around the room. Look, we don't got a shot here, all right? There are no perfect people here, me included. But we can take one small step toward God. One small step toward God. Just looking more and more like him along the way. This is what he's saying. This is what the foundation looks like. So first thing is it's not a works-based deal. And then the second part is this idea of this checkbox. If I just do these things, I'll be a good Christian. There's no such thing as a quote-unquote good Christian, okay? But here's what happens. God takes our obedience and he uses it in his story. In fact, what if I told you that being obedient to God, doing the things God's asked you to do has nothing to do with you? What if the benefit had nothing to do with you? Look at it like this. Let's put the first one up. Check this out. Forgiveness and reconciliation, right? Don't look ahead. This was one of the things he asked about Sermon on the Mount. Be a forgiver, reconcile to those who you've created distance because of whatever problem. Why? Because it moves his story forward. How does it do that? Well, what's the story of God? That Jesus came to reconcile, right? Through forgiveness, we're made reconciled with God. Our sin is forgiven, and we're brought back into relationship with him. The whole story of God is forgiveness and reconciliation. But when the people of God walk out into the world and we can't forgive anybody, we can't reconcile with anybody, we confuse the world. The world looks and goes, I thought your God was all about forgiveness. Well, who are you? Like, well, I know I love you, but you're from a different political party. So that's like the one exception God's given. No, it's not, by the way. That was free. We'll come back to that in a couple months. Look at how it works. Look at the next one. What about our giving? Our giving is how God meets the needs of others. Right? Think about it. How does God meet the needs of people? Now, is it possible he could drop $1 million in your bank? Yes. Keep praying. Good luck. Right? But most of the time, he meets the needs of people through others. All right, and here's the deal. Listen, some of you are like, oh, I can't meet every need. There's too many. You're right. That's not the point. You're not supposed to, right? If you try to give money to every person you saw on the street, and you try to give to every little animal thing that popped up on the screen when you're watching TV, like you're going to run out all that. What God's looking for is when he taps you on the shoulder, you say, okay. So it's not every time, but you might be looking at a friend and go, man, that friend really needs help. I'm praying for them. Oh, that friend needs help. I'm praying for them. That friend needs help. I'm praying. Oh, God says, no. I think you can help with this one. Get in there. See? That's how. So we just get a glimpse, and we'll stop there. We won't go forward. But this is a picture of how when we're obedient to God, it's really not about us. Now, is there some icing on the cake? Yeah. God oftentimes blesses us when we're obedient, but don't be foolish to think that's why we do it. God's given you everything you need by saving you through the cross. He doesn't owe us anything else. But he's gracious and loving, and he overflows all kinds of things into our life. But that's not why we do it. And so Jesus is reeling this thing back, saying, listen, hear me, and then go do it. But listen and understand why. It's not to get to me. It's because you're already with me. I want this to be the overflow of your life. And then if we go back to verse 24 really quick. And then the last piece, it says that this house is built on the rock, okay? Now, the rock at this point in time, just for context you can understand, homes were built differently. Basically, I don't think anyone in this room built their own home. Actually, I know some of you are like, I built my home. You picked what you wanted. You didn't actually, with hammer and nail, build your home. Is that right? Oh, you all did. Wonderful. Okay. Well, good for you. Sarah and I did not, all right? It would look crooked if we did. But point is, at this point in time, builders could be hired to help you build a home, but they were really expensive, and it wasn't very common. So most families would build their own home. And to build a home at this point in time, one of the key parts, which is still a key part today, is the foundation. Exactly. And so it was super important at this point in time in history where they were living, so the people that Jesus were speaking to, they would have two options. It would either going to be a sandy ground or a bedrock, something that was typically under the sand. They'd have to dig under to find it. And the idea would be, hey, listen, if you dig deep enough, if you check the soil around you, you can find a piece of bedrock that'll give you a sturdy foundation for your home. Now, I had to explain that to us to make sure we understood it. But at this point in time, when Jesus told this story, they knew immediately what he was talking about. And they knew how foolish it would be if you didn't do this. Okay, so let's go to verse 25. He keeps going. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house. But it did not fall because it had been founded on the rock. Now, the people there go, duh, that makes sense. Bedrock, build your house there, you're good to go. That's how it is. Strong foundation here today, modern world. Build it on a strong foundation, you're in good shape. But he says rain, floods, wind. He begins to talk about, hey, in life, there's going to be things that hit us. There's going to be things that come in, trials, struggles, problems. And these three categories are actually very helpful for us. The first one is rain. When he says rain, we can think about things that happen unexpectedly. I didn't see it come in, and then out of nowhere, something popped up, and now we're having to deal with it. This could look like this. Go to that next slide here, the rain. Could be a loss of a job. Could be a breakup or a divorce. It could be just a betrayal within a relationship. Could be a cancer diagnosis, right? So these are the things that they just kind of unexpectedly pop up and whoa, we're in a whirlwind here. This is tough. He's saying build a foundation so that you can survive. Then he goes on to the floods. And he says think of this as situations that as they grow, they could possibly overwhelm you, right? Just overwhelming experience that if I don't get a handle on this, this is going to take me out. Could be a work or a school deadline, family responsibilities, expectations, grief and loss, growing addiction. So these are the kind of things that they keep bubbling, and if we're not careful, I don't know if I can sustain. And then finally he says the winds. And the winds, we could almost think of a tornado, or maybe in our context, a hurricane, right? This kind of a wind, some big storm. And you think of this as, so here it is, and yet it just keeps beating you. It just keeps hitting. It just doesn't stop. It's just constant, and it's wearing you down. This could be chronic illness. That's a huge one. Difficulties at work, maybe a difficult marriage, or a rebellious or wayward child. And he says, man, all of these things in life, and obviously this list is so small, like there's so many more, and you could insert your thing. But he says, in life, we're going to have trials. James told us, Jesus is telling us, we know from our experience. And he's saying, hey, as this stuff comes, as this stuff starts to hit you, what I want you to think about is how do you respond? Because how you respond is a picture of the foundation you either do or don't have. So then he goes on, next verse, and he says this, and everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them, so here comes the contrast, will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. Now, again, for context, it's helpful to understand at this point in time, particularly in Palestine, there was lots of sand. It was the prominent area. And so a lot of these homes, they really had to be careful because if they built on the sand, oftentimes those unexpected rains would come. They'd come heavily. They would flood the Jordan, and the Jordan River, as it overflowed, would come and it would wash homes away because as soon as that water hit the sand, it would erode, and boom, there goes your home. And so now Jesus paints this contrast. And again, in this group, they would have completely understood what he was saying. Hey, if you don't do what I'm saying, your foundation is more built on sand than it is on the bedrock. And all it takes is a little storm of life, and you're going to get washed away. And so then we go, well, wait a minute. Why would you build on the sand if you know that's what's going to happen? Well, maybe they liked the view from where their house might be. Maybe there was this amazing view of the Jordan that was just beautiful, and they thought, wow, that view is worth it. Let's take a chance and see what happens. Maybe they were just being lazy. I don't want to dig. I don't want to keep moving. It's dry right now. It seems like this is going to be fine. Why don't we just build right here and we'll pray for the best? And we go, are we much different? Because here's what Jesus is saying to us. A lot of us, when we like a good sermon or a good worship song, maybe a good Christian book or fill in the gap, we hear these things, we read these things, we see these things, we like these things, but we don't take them and live them out. And Jesus is saying that's like building a house on sand versus solid rock. It'll last for a little while, and it could even look great. You could look like the perfect person rolling into church. Gosh, they've always got their Bible. Man, they're all, but then, Sunday night through Saturday night, it's a totally different experience. And Jesus is saying that's a risk. That's a risk because you're building something that isn't going to last. It's not going to sustain. And look at the last verse, 27. He says this. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell. And what was it? Great was the fall of it. Why was it great? Because when your house gets washed away, so does everything else that you own. Has anyone ever been homeless before? Maybe by a difficult circumstance financially. Maybe you sold your home and are trying to buy a home, but there's this middle ground, and you actually found yourself for a brief time homeless. Maybe you got hit by one of the hurricanes or the floods and your house had damage and there was a season where you were just looking for a place to live. If you've been in any kind of scenario like that, you know how just scary and how dangerous it feels to just be homeless. Like it just feels empty. And he's saying, great is the fall if you have a house that you built, but you didn't build it on a strong foundation and it washes away. And he's saying, you have a chance here. I have a chance. We have a chance to do this. And so his picture is, hey, listen, if you build two houses and you build them with the same material, same wall, same roof, same door, same window, same whatever, exactly the same. They're both beautiful, but one built on the sand and one built on the rock. He says, wait, because if the storms come, you're going to figure out which one was built on the foundation. Because one's going to wash away, one's going to be still standing. You might even see this in your own life right now. Maybe at work or in a friend group, there's a person that isn't really following the Lord, is not really a Christ follower, and when they go through tough times, it's just doom and gloom and disaster. And hopefully for you, you may be working toward this, and that's okay, but hopefully for you, they're looking at you going, man, you keep going through disaster and storms, and yet you seem to have this sense of peace, this sense of faith that it'll be okay, even though it looks like a terrible situation. This is what Jesus is saying. And it looks totally different, but he's giving us a way to build something that will last. This is crazy to think about, but it's actually happened. This parable happened in real life. There was a couple, Pam and Warren, and they had a home, and it was completely destroyed during Hurricane Rita. And so after their home was destroyed, they decided to rebuild, and they said, man, we're going to do this right. We're going to do whatever we got to do. We want to build a house that lasts. So they did the research and put all the money and the investment and all that in. And of course, they hope for the best, right? That's always the deal. We're hoping for the best. No storms. Sure enough, here comes Hurricane Ike. Completely wiped through their town yet again. But once the hurricane was gone and everything had passed, a helicopter pilot took this picture. Check this out. Look at their house. Here's another one, a little wider angle, so you can get kind of the one house still standing. Isn't that crazy? One house. And of course, the question everybody's asking then is, well, how? What'd you do? Who did you use to build that thing? Because this is incredible. And I'll tell you what they did. A lot of research. They spent a lot of money, so it's a different context for our story. It's not what we're talking about, but they spent about $100,000. They invested to make that house built in a way that it could possibly sustain. And sure enough, it did. Listen, here's what we got to hear. What Jesus is asking, it isn't easy, right? Following his ways, or we'll just put it simply put, doing the right thing isn't easy. And it will cost you at times. It'll cost you relationships maybe. It'll cost you opportunities. And yet, it's worth it. Because what you're building on is something that'll last. And this is what Jesus is desiring of us. Again, not to be saved, but in an overflow of what he's done for us. We say, hey, I want to live for you. And in addition, we get to be a part of his story, watching him work through us. But it starts with the little things. My son, Kason, has grown a love for pickleball, which is awesome. I don't know where he got it from, not sure. But he's grown, I play a lot of pickleball in case you didn't pick up on that. He's grown to love it. And so as I've been helping him get ready to play pickleball, I set up a deal in the garage where he could train on his own. It looks like this. So he just sits in the garage, stands, and he just hits up against the wall. And I'm very fortunate that I have a son that's willing to surrender to my evil tactics. And so he doesn't mind, and he'll actually go out there on his own sometimes. But sometimes he'll say, when are we going to go play? I just want to play. Like he wants to play people. But I know something that he doesn't know. And that is that to play that game well, it starts in the drilling phase. It starts building the fundamentals that no one will see, so that when you get out on the court, you're ready to handle the different things that come your way. And so this past Sunday, for the first time, we went out with the adults. And we played on a Sunday night, and he went out there with a bunch of people he didn't know, and he held his own. He held his own. And I know why, and I didn't put it in his face, but I'll tell you. It was because he put the work in the private places when no one was looking, making the decisions, right? And that same is for you and I. I mean, it's when no one's looking that it matters most. That's when it's built. And Jesus is saying, I've given you a blueprint. If you're not sure what to do, just come to my word and look at it, and I'll guide you. I'll help you to see what's right and wrong. And as you do that over time, you build your life on something that lasts. And this is what he desires for us. I want to go through these quickly because I don't want to run out of time. This may feel like a lot, but I'm hoping it's helpful. I want to show you quickly some signs that you might be relying on something other than God and some signs that you might be relying on him, okay? So let me go through these quickly. Here's some signs that you might be relying on something other than God. You start hiding your real feelings from others. No one really gets to see the real you. Number 2, we have chronic negative thoughts about ourselves and the future. If that's you, again, there's no shame thrown this way, but you might think about that. Like, why am I always having these negative thoughts about the future? It's just constant. Maybe you're relying on something that's not the right source. Number 3, I got 5. We are quick to cut off friends who have hurt us. So that forgiveness, that reconciliation is kind of kicked to the curb. Number 4, we become dependent on the attention of others to feel good about ourselves. And then number 5, we are jealous and envious of others' success and happiness. Now again, this isn't a blanket statement, one size fits all, but if one of these or a couple of these resonated with you, it's possible that maybe where the anchor is, right? Maybe where the foundation is laid, maybe there's something missing. How do we know? Well, let's look at the opposite of these. This is what it might look like if you are relying on the Lord. Admitting our needs to our friends and asking for help. Why do we do that? Because it makes us stronger. We're not in it alone. God never, throughout the Bible, wanted us to do it alone. He wants us to do it together. Number 2, trusting that God is bigger than we are helps quiet our negative thoughts. Maybe part of why you're struggling with those negative thoughts, that chronic fear of the future, is because you're not thinking about God being in control, but rather you being in control. And when you're not in control, which is most of our life, it can be overwhelming. Number 3, believing God cares about us calms our worries. All right, you believe there's a God, but if you believe he's over there and distant and far from us, and he's not there caring for us, which he is, Scripture's clear about that. It can build distrust and fear in your life. Number 4, 2 more. Choosing to love and forgive leads us to have happier relationships. Right? That whole separation thing, this isn't what God designed. He wants us to be unified. Right? That's why we got to meet each other's name periodically. We got to connect because he wants us to be connected. But man, when we struggle to forgive and love others, it just confuses the world. And then number 5, the last one, learning to find satisfaction in God alone is freeing. Right? So these are some of the things that happen when we build this thing right. All of a sudden, we begin to look at the world differently because we're looking at the world through God's eyes. And this is what he's trying to articulate. So I told you about my knee injury. Well, lo and behold, after I finally worked through my rehab and all of that good stuff, I didn't do all my rehab, that's worth noting, but I tried and I got through my injury and blah, blah, blah. Well, 7 years later, I'm now in full-time ministry. I'd been a pastor for a couple years. And I decided, they said, don't play contact sports. So I said, well, I can play basketball, right? Well, turns out basketball is dangerous too. And so I'm driving down the court on a fast break in a little church pickup league. Never should have been there. Driving down the court and I go up to make a layup. Actually, on this leg, I go up to make a layup. And as I plant, this time, my knee didn't go this way, it went this way. And I hyperextended it, and I tore my ACL, my patellar, and both meniscuses. And if you know anything about medicine, there was a wonderful medical article written on my knee because I tore 2 major ligaments that run opposite directions. They'd never seen that before. And so what happened is I had to first get the ACL repaired and work through the entire rehab process about a year, then go back under to get the patella repaired and work through that process again. So now both legs, both knees have had catastrophic knee injuries. Now, the point of this is the response. See, the first one, it felt like my life was over. And I literally tried to medicate myself. But the second one, don't get me wrong, I don't want to mitigate pain because pain is pain, right? And I'm not talking just the physical. Like, it was hard. I wasn't laying on my bed with my knee cracked over, but like, this is what James was talking about. Let's go, bring on the joy. No, it was extremely painful. It was hard. There were tough moments that felt weak, but the difference is the response. Because I went through that injury, and what I ended up learning later on was that I think God used that moment to slow me down. Can you imagine? It was like, at the first one, I was chasing all the wild things, and then I got my life right. I got into ministry. I'm serving God. I'm a pastor. I'm doing all the things the right way. And then I tear my knee even worse, and I do it on the other one. That doesn't make any sense. And yet I look back, and I go, man, I was running at such a high pace early on as a young guy in ministry that I was headed for burnout before I even knew it. And I think that moment God used to create a slowdown, to pump the brakes, to teach me something, to actually save me from some things that happened during that season. All kinds of stuff that were going on. See, the difference is the response. One, I chased to fix myself. The other, I stayed locked into the Lord. It wasn't easy. It was still hard. But yet the result on the other end was much more better, much more beautiful, right? And so what I'm saying to you is this foundation thing is a real deal. And Jesus wants us to see it clearly so that we can live it out. And I want to close by reading the parable to you one more time. I'm going to read it in the Message translation, which is just simply put, it's a more modern, easier to understand vernacular. So let me read this to you. Also, heads up, there's a cuss word in it. If you grew up in a conservative home, stupid might have been a cuss word for you. Just so you know, stupid's in there. Cover your ears if you need to. That was a joke. Relax. Okay. Some of you are like, this church was so great. And then they started cussing. Let's know. These words I speak to you are not incidental additions to your life, homeowner improvements to your standard of living. They are foundational words, words to build a life on. If you work these words into your life, you are like a smart carpenter who has built his house on a solid rock. Rain poured down, the river flooded, a tornado hit, but nothing moved that house. It was fixed to the rock. But if you just use my words in Bible studies or sermons or books or worship songs and don't work them into your life, you are like a stupid carpenter who built his house on the sandy beach. When a storm rolled in and the waves came up, it collapsed like a house of cards. So how do we do this? Well, the first thing we got to do, if we're going to live out his principles, is we got to know them. And we know them by reading the Bible and by listening when we're gathered together or wherever you are, going, God, show me. I'm hearing what you're saying. How can I live this out? I want to apply this to my life. We're never going to be perfect. We can't do it all at once, but we can take one small step at a time as we grow to become more and more like him. And then in 2 weeks, we're going to talk about how to read and understand the Bible. And I think it's going to be extremely helpful. So I don't want you to miss out, because that's how we're going to learn the principles so that we can put them into action.